So, welcome to my new video series on spiritual superpowers. And we're going to start with fasting. Yes, you heard me correctly. Fasting is a spiritual superpower. And I'm going to explain to you why I think that's the case and also help you get going if you're not already a pro faster, to get you going, give you some ideas on maybe why consider doing it, what the benefits are, and some tips on how to successfully fast. So, fasting is a really old practice, and it's always been linked to spirituality. All the major religions include some form of fasting. So, whether we're talking about the Muslims practicing Ramadan, Catholics with Lent, we're talking about Hinduism, Buddhism, all have fasting as part of their practices. If you're heavily into yoga, you go to a yoga retreat, especially go to one in India, they will almost definitely get you into fasting. So, fasting is a spiritual practice that has been around for millennia. And how do we know that? Well, for Christians, it's of interest that the Bible mentions fasting over 70 times, right from the start through to the end. And fasting is a part of both Old and New Testament. And there's different types of fasting that is also included. Sometimes it's an individual, sometimes it's a group, and sometimes it's a whole nation. So we're going to talk about these different types of fasts. But perhaps for Christians, the most important thing to remember is that Jesus didn't actually say it was optional. He said, when you fast. He said, when you pray, and then he gave directions on prayer. And then he said, when you fast. He didn't say if you fast. And when I asked about fasting from a pastor some years back, he said, it is not compulsory, but it is essential. So if you're a Christian, fasting is not compulsory. Your salvation doesn't depend on it, put it that way. But if you're serious about your walk with God, it is an essential part of your life. So let's have a look at some of the things that the Bible says about fasting. I want to read a quote from Jesus, which I think is maybe the most important one, really. He said, and this is quoting Matthew chapter 6, Jesus said, and when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, but when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So there's a few different points to pick out. One is when you fast, so you should fast. Secondly, don't make it obvious. Fasting should actually be such a natural thing to you that you can carry on with daily activities within reason. And also, God rewards you for fasting. So not only are you seeking God and seeking connection with Him, He will reward you. So ultimately, the aim of fasting is you're spending less time in the kitchen and more time connecting with God. You're preparing yourself for it with your body being in a fasted state, because that's when you're more sensitive to the spiritual. That's something very important to remember, that it does something to you. Remember that Paul spoke about us being spirit, soul, and body in that order. So this is now the spirit part of you strengthens as you fast, as your physical body essentially weakens and kind of slows down. So you become heightened spiritually. Your awareness is heightened. Now, to just expand on how deeply spiritual fasting is, I'll just take some Bible quotes and explain what it says about it. The Psalms talk about when I wept and humbled my soul with fasting. So there's something about humbling yourself when you fast. Paul spoke about disciplining his body. Again, it's that idea of dying to flesh and being alive to spirit. Daniel spoke about how he would turn his face to the Lord God and seek him by prayer, pleas of mercy with fasting. So for Daniel, there's a very good example of fasting and prayer. For us, he would seek God on matters through fasting. There's also in Acts, it talks about a group of Christians worshipping the Lord and fasting. And what was the result? As a result, they were directed to send Paul and Barnabas off on a mission journey. So sometimes fasting is when God gives you direction in life. Maybe you have a big decision to make. Maybe you're stepping into a new season, starting something new. Very good time to pray and fast. Now, some of the fascinating examples in the Old Testament were cases where whole groups and nations would fast on a national matter. So one example is in the book of Esther, when the nation is in danger of being exterminated, the Jewish nation. She gets the Jews in the capital to all fast with her for 3 days before she approaches the king, remembering that just approaching him, she put her life in danger. So they prepared for this with fasting. Another example is book of Jonah, where the inhabitants of Nineveh were given this judgment message. They believed that Jonah was a real prophet from God, that his word was true. They got scared. They declared a fast across the whole city, from the greatest to the least, and even animals were told to be put on a fast with the men, women, and children. And it worked because God decided not to destroy them. So a whole city fasted there. So that's a really fascinating example of how fasting is powerful. Imagine if the UK fasted even for a day and prayed and sought God. It could turn around this country. So I'm just putting it out there. Wouldn't that be an amazing thing to see? Now, in book of Joel, the Lord is giving people an encouragement and saying, return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and mourning. So there's something that fasting can be also a sign that you're seeking God and you're repenting from something. Another example is when King David's baby was sick that he'd had with Bathsheba. He was fasting in the hope that the baby could be saved. So that's one thing that can be done as well. If somebody is sick, you can fast and pray for healing. It can be either for yourself or the person who is sick. Now, maybe one of the most kind of interesting comments that Jesus made on fasting was when his disciples could not cast out a demon. And they asked him, why couldn't we do it? Because they'd been able to do it on other occasions. And this was his response. He said, this kind of demon does not go out except by prayer and fasting. So certain types of deliverance from demonic oppression will only come with prayer and fasting. So I would say if you're planning to fast, pray and ask for guidance on what type of fast and for how long. And always approach it with prayer to get the maximum spiritual benefit from it. Now, quite famously, Jesus fasted 40 days in the wilderness and he was eating nothing and he was tempted by the devil. Elijah fasted 40 days and nights. Moses fasted without food and drink for 40 days and 40 nights when he was given the law and the 10 commandments. Now that is purely miraculous. I'd say don't try that at home. That's unless you're Moses levels on the mountain with the Lord. Don't even push yourself that far. There are ways you can get the benefits of fasting in ways that are kind of more easily accessible for us. So I think just one more thing about fasting is you can have the wrong motive. I know someone who got so into fasting that he started to do it because he'd always end up with a six-pack by the end of it. And the Lord in the end told him to stop because he was doing it for the wrong reasons. So there are physical benefits, which we'll talk about in a minute. But don't do it for those reasons. Do it for the spiritual reasons. Some of the things that have happened to me during fasts is new opportunities have come my way. I've had real clarity about people and their role in my life. I've had real clarity about what my next steps need to be. So there's so much that can come out of it. It can almost like fast forward your life to the next phase as well. So it's very, very powerful spiritually. Meditate on scriptures. You can Google search lists of scriptures on fasting. So I would say if you're thinking of doing it, go over those prayerfully and consider what type of fasting you want to maybe start off with. Now, just to run through some of the different types of fasting, there's something called dry fasting. That's when you don't have water or any food. So no liquid, no food. That you can only do for very short periods of time. I managed it for a whole day, prayed on a matter, got my answer, and was happy to have a drink. I drink a lot of fluids each day. I need it for my physical body. So that was really, for me, the one day without water was probably harder than several days without food, but with liquids. Now, when it comes to wet fasting, which is where you don't have any solid food, but you do have liquids, you'll have water, or you might have water and some juices, or I'll talk to you about another method, which is using like a syrup mix. That you can carry on quite easily for a number of days. So that would be wet fasting. And even 72 hours, so 3 days without food, will reset your immune system. So you'll already get health benefits as well as the spiritual benefits. Now, there's something called a Daniel fast, which is essentially you being vegan without alcohol and caffeine as well. And it's based on how Daniel describes that he ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth for 3 weeks. So that's a Daniel fast. So that's something you could also try. If the thought of going without food completely for more than a day is intimidating you and scaring you, you could do a Daniel fast. You can also fast from other things. It doesn't have to be food and drink. You could have a social media fast. I think most of us would choose social media over food, potentially. But if social media distracts you a lot from your prayer time, from your time in the Bible, in the Word, that might be something to consider, to take a break from it, to reduce your time on your phone. You know, we can adapt to the fasting principle to other modern day living as well. Now, obviously, the 40 days is like the ultimate. I know a few people that have done it. They tend to be men. So as my fasts got a little bit longer, I did pray about it. And I said, Lord, where are we headed with this? And the word I got was that for a woman of childbearing age, God would never direct a fast longer than 28 days because of your cycle. So if you're a female, even if you're getting into longer fasts, I would recommend topping it at 28 days. For a man, you can push your body further, but again, be guided. You don't need to go to those types of lengths to get the benefits of fasting. That kind of depends on the depth of your walk and your calling, where you would take it. But absolutely be guided. So even just a couple of days can be really, really powerful. I would say look into this method if you want to do it healthily and relatively easily. They have got this specific syrup you can use that you mix with water, gives you all the nutrients and sugars you need. Doing this fast, I had a lot of healing. I also got rid of things like cellulite. And I'm just going to share a couple of stories now of fasting. So there's two quite fun stories. One is when my dog fasted with me. So the first fast I tried was the one where you don't eat during the day, but you break in the evening and have a meal at night. So my dog, who was used to having a breakfast and a dinner, she realized I'm not eating during the day. So after 2 days of observing me do this, she stopped eating in the morning. And she's a greedy little doggy, and she would refuse her breakfast, and then she'd eat in the evening with me. And we had a couple of months before lost my old dog, which was her companion. And she had, since losing her friend, she had become sick and depressed. She was starting to have allergies. She was starting to feel really low. I could tell she'd kind of lost the will to live. So she did this fast with me. And no joke, within 2 months after the fast, I had been offered a rescue puppy. So she got a little animal friend. She wasn't on her own anymore, got a new lease of life. She's never looked back, and she's never fasted with me again. She's just let me get on with it and made sure that she still gets her dinners. But I do believe that in her own way, she did a fasting with me and she got the result. She got blessed with a little doggy friend. So that's one cute story. The second story is more of an inspirational one. So soon after I left Jehovah's Witnesses and had completely extricated myself from that world and from that place, I did a fast that was a little bit longer. And a friend had explained to me about fasting and said, if you're able to, you should leave off the medication and trust that the Lord sustains you. I hasten to add that none of my medication was life-sustaining, but I did have medication for pain and heart function. And I left it off. And at the end of the fast, I never went back on any of the medication. And especially the painkiller that I was taking regularly each night helped with jaw pain, with TMJ pain, which is this particular jaw joint. It's extremely painful because of where your TMJ joint is, the temporomandibular joint. I never went back on painkillers, and I remained symptom-free from TMJ pain until today. I also had a condition called POTS associated with my EDS condition. And for that, I was taking medication 3 times a day to help my body with blood pressure and heartbeat regulation. I never went back on that medication. So this amount of medicine I used to be on, and I'm not taking any of it now. And the medication for POTS was quite specialized. It's called Midodrine. I initially got it from hospital, then the pharmacy was able to issue it. I know it costs a lot of money. I calculated that my monthly medication would have cost society and NHS at least £1.5 grand. And I was able to basically come off all of it. Some health issues remain. Each time I fast, I find I'm in physically much better shape as well as spiritually. So there's a real healing element to fasting. But as always, be reasonable about it, pray into things, and yeah, just start slow and build it up. But fasting is an incredible superpower. It is a spiritual superpower. It can really transform your life and your thinking. Now, I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, so I want to talk a little bit at the end here about Jehovah's Witnesses and fasting. As a witness, fasting was never talked about. It was only mentioned in passing. It was considered something not for Christians. So witnesses don't teach you to fast, which is curious considering they like to consider themselves very much based on the Bible, doing things like the early Christians, but yet they don't fast. And I thought to myself, what could be the reasons? This is the conclusion I've come to. The leadership and the people who write the Watchtower magazines and articles and books, they know fasting is powerful because they would have read Christian authors that write about it. But they don't want people fasting. And I tell you why they don't encourage fasting. Because fasting connects you to God in a powerful way. It makes you more spiritually sensitive, and it moves things forward in your life, gives you direction to take on new things. They don't want people that are witnesses to have any of that. They don't want people who are Jehovah's Witnesses hearing from God for themselves or connecting with God, because the leadership want everybody reliant on their direction. They are the ones you're supposed to look towards, not Jesus. So they don't want anybody having any experiences where they feel directed by God. They want to be the one giving the direction. So they want to cut you away from spiritual potential, not encourage you towards it. And another thing is they like to tell you how to live your life, what to do. So Jehovah's Witnesses are encouraged to have part-time jobs, menial jobs with no prospects professionally, keep life very, very basic, very simple, make themselves available to do lots of voluntary work for the organization, some of it maintaining and building properties for free as part of your service for them. Now, they obviously profit enormously financially from that. So one reason I believe Jehovah's Witnesses don't teach fasting is they want people to stay reliant on them, trapped in the organization, not moving forward with their life in any way. They want to tell you what you should do with your life. They don't want you connecting with God to find out what he actually purposed you to do. So I would say if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you're watching this, or you're a Jehovah's Witness leaving and have left and watching this, consider fasting, because that might be your quickest way. That would be your spiritual superpower to harness, to really seek God and find out what his plan for you is. So if you're a believer, I would say consider fasting and that becoming a part of your life, a regular practice. My usual year would be 3 fasts. One March, April time, one in August, September, one in November. Around those times seems to be good times to fast. At least that's when I get directed to do it. I always feel physically much better and rejuvenated after it. And during the fast, lots of interesting, exciting things happen, and I feel closer to God and I get revelation and direction. So consider fasting. It's really, really powerful. It is a spiritual superpower.